February 1993. Liverpool, England. As winter gripped the city in its cold, gray silence, a discovery was made that shattered not just one family, but an entire nation. Along the railway tracks in Walton, officers stumbled upon a sight that would haunt the country for decades: a small, lifeless body, severed in half by a passing train. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident. But the truth was far more chilling. This wasn't just a body. It was the mutilated corpse of a 2-year-old boy. His name is James Bulger. James had suffered 42 separate injuries. His tiny skull fractured, his face beaten, his body bruised, and most disturbingly, there were signs of sexual assault. Paint had been smeared across his face. He had been left on the railway in a deliberate pose. His upper body placed across the tracks, as if to stage a tragic accident. What horrified investigators even more was not only what had been done, but who had done it. They completely shattered the community of England. Who was this innocent little boy, whose life was stolen so cruelly? And who, or what, could drive to this brutal, calculated murder? This is the story of James Bulger's murder. And once you hear it, you will never forget it. The disappearance of James Bulger. James Patrick Bulger was born on March 16, 1990, in Liverpool, England. He was the second child of Denise Fergus, who had tragically lost her first baby during pregnancy. That loss made James even more precious. Denise cherished him with everything she had. James was a bright, energetic toddler, the kind who never walked into a room, but ran into it. He loved to laugh. He loved to make others laugh. He was cheeky, charming, and had a sparkle in his blue eyes that made strangers smile. His family called him a little character. He was the heartbeat of their home. Denise rarely let James out of her sight. But on February James out of her 3, she brought him along on a shopping trip to Bootle Strand shopping center with her boyfriend's sister. James, as always, was full of energy, darting around, touching everything, refusing to sit still. Denise had brought along snacks to keep him occupied. They were nearing the end of their shopping trip, stopping at the butcher's. Just one final item before heading home. For a brief moment, Denise turned away to pay at the counter. Just seconds. When she looked back, James was gone. Panic set in immediately. She rushed outside, scanning every aisle, every face. No trace. She contacted mall security, and within minutes, a missing child alert echoed through the building's speakers. His description was repeated over and over. But there was no response. No sighting, no James. By 4:15 p.m., Denise called the police. And within hours, an all-out search operation began. Officers flooded the shopping center and surrounding neighborhoods. Canals and alleyways were inspected. The police feared the worst, that James may have wandered off and fallen into water, or into the path of traffic. For 2 days, his name filled the headlines. Flyers were posted across Liverpool. News bulletins pleaded for information. His parents were questioned, then cleared. CCTV footage was reviewed. Then, on Sunday, February 14th, a railway worker spotted something unusual on the tracks near Walton. At first, he thought it was a doll. But it wasn't a doll. It was James. His tiny body lay on the cold steel rails, severed in half by a passing train. What began as a missing child case had just become one of Britain's most horrifying murder investigations. The investigation. From the moment James's body was found on the railway tracks, the case transformed. From a desperate search for a missing child into a full-scale homicide investigation. The investigators saw through it immediately. This wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Within hours, the area was sealed off. Forensic teams scoured the site. They found blood, stained bricks, a blue paint can, a metal bar, and a pair of batteries, suspected to have been inserted into the child's body. The brutality shocked even the most hardened detectives. Many had dealt with homicides before, but this one, involving a 2-year-old, felt unimaginable. Detectives began working backward. They reviewed CCTV footage from the shopping center, tracking James's final moments. It revealed a critical breakthrough. James was seen being led away by two young boys. But who were they? Investigators cycled through multiple hypotheses in their early days. The most immediate assumption was accidental death. Perhaps James had wandered away and, in a tragic twist, ended up on the tracks, but that theory unraveled quickly. His injuries were too numerous, too violent, and too deliberately inflicted. The placement of his body, laid purposefully across the rails, suggested staging, not fate. Another theory pointed to a sexual predator. The state of James's body, partially undressed, with suspicious bruising and the presence of batteries possibly inserted into his body, led detectives to consider whether this was the work of a pedophile. But the idea didn't hold long. There were no signs of adult footprints or forced entry into any secure areas. No DNA, no adult suspect on camera. Then came the more chilling possibility: could the killers be children themselves? At first, it seemed absurd. The level of violence, the cold deliberation, was unthinkable in the hands of a 10-year-old. Officers reviewed the CCTV footage again. The figures were small, their postures childlike. But could they really? Detectives launched a broad sweep of local schools, requesting records of students who had skipped class that Friday. Still, there was no clear answer. Public pressure intensified. James's image was everywhere. His mother's televised pleas haunted the nation. Then, quietly, a phone rang at a local police station. A woman had seen the CCTV footage on the news. She recognized the boys. And that call would change everything. The suspects. The breakthrough came not through fingerprints or forensics, but through a phone call. Days after James's murder, police released grainy CCTV footage to the public, showing two small figures leading him away by the hand. A woman, watching the news, froze. One of the boys looked eerily familiar. She reported the son of her friend, John Venables, a 10-year-old boy from Walton. He had skipped school the day James disappeared. So had another troubled boy from the same school, Robert Thompson. But who were they really? Both boys came from homes marked by instability and emotional neglect. John Venables lived in a household plagued by mental health issues. His mother suffered from severe depression and had a history of leaving her children unattended. Teachers described John as moody, erratic, prone to sudden outbursts. He would bang his head against walls, cut himself with scissors, and talk to himself in class. He showed early signs of emotional disturbance, but his cries for help were overlooked. Robert Thompson, the fifth of 7 brothers, grew up in chaos and violence. His father had abandoned the family, and his mother struggled with alcohol abuse and disengagement. The home was a place of fights, screaming, and broken furniture. Robert was frequently absent from school, known for bullying, lying, and manipulating others. Some of his siblings had already fallen into crime. He had no real support system, only survival instincts. In both cases, teachers had raised concerns. But the system failed to intervene in time. What clinched it for police wasn't just the resemblance. It was the paint. John had come home that day with blue paint on his jacket. The same paint found smeared across James's face. When detectives arrived at the homes on February 18th, they found even more. Robert's shoes were stained with blood. His tread pattern matched the injury imprints found on James's skull. Robert cried when officers asked him to come in. But one detective later said, "He cried like a performance. I never saw real fear in him. Not once." To John, meanwhile, broke down completely. He clung to his mother, sobbing uncontrollably. The two boys were separated and taken to different stations for questioning. Police knew they were entering uncharted territory, interviewing 10-year-olds about a brutal murder. From the start, their personalities diverged. Robert was calm, strategic, evasive. He denied everything, then began pushing blame onto John. John was emotional, unstable, and overwhelmed by fear. He initially denied even being at the shopping center. But the evidence piled up. CCTV placed both boys at the scene. John's fingerprints were found at the mall. Robert's shoes matched the brutal injuries on James's head. Bit by bit, their stories unraveled. John was the first to break. After a private talk with his mother, who told him, "Tell the truth. We'll still love you." He finally whispered, "I killed him." From there, the confession poured out. "We took him, and we were walking around with him. I took his hand. We were going to throw him in the water, but he wouldn't kneel down. He wouldn't stay down, so we kept hitting him." Robert, on the other hand, clung to controlled. "If I wanted to kill someone, why wouldn't I kill my own little brother first?" He tried to sound rational, logical, even clever. But the truth kept slipping through the cracks. At one point, Robert admitted, "We just wanted to make him lost, so he'd get hit by a car." Even as they confessed, neither boy showed real remorse. One detective described Robert's emotional outbursts as dry tears. There wasn't grief. There was a calculation. John's biggest fear wasn't what he had done. It was being sent to prison. "Are we not going to school anymore? Will we go to jail forever?" In between sobs, John still tried to shift blame back to Robert, saying he didn't want to kill James, that he was trying to stop it. But the most chilling thing wasn't their lies. It was that, for 10-year boys, they understood exactly what they had done. And they were already thinking about how to get away with it. The nation had its suspects. And what they said in those interrogation rooms still echoes across the United Kingdom to this day. The last chance to save James. A detail that the murder of James Bulger even more regretting is this: it didn't happen in secret. It happened in the open, in daylight, in public spaces, and at least 38 people saw him, a crying toddler, confused and wounded, being led away by two older boys. These weren't seconds-long glimpses. Some saw the trio walking along bridges. Others watched them pass by in shopping centers. A few stood close enough to speak with them. And yet, no one intervened. Shortly after James was taken from the shopping center, the boys passed a pair of women outside a bakery. They noticed James was crying hard, his face visibly red and upset. One of the women leaned over and asked, "Is he all right?" John didn't flinch. "He's our brother. He's lost. We're taking him to the police station." That simple lie, delivered with the innocence of a child, was enough. The women nodded and let them walk on. Later, near a canal, another adult spotted the boys. James had clearly been injured. His forehead was bruised and bleeding slightly. This time, an elderly woman stopped them. She was whimpering, dragging his feet, and his pants were soiled. But, again, Robert calmly repeated the same line. "We just found him. We're helping him find his mom." She believed them. She even pointed out the direction of the nearest police station. The boys nodded, said thank you, and walked in the opposite direction. Another near intervention came from a woman walking her dog. She noticed the bruises, the distress. Something didn't feel right. She considered stepping in. But her dog was growling, uncomfortable around children, so she paused, and in that hesitation, they were gone. At one point, the boys ran into an older teenager who knew them. He noticed the toddler. "What are you doing with that kid?" Robert replied that the boy was John's little brother. The teen was suspicious, but didn't want to get involved. He warned, "You'd better take him home. If you don't, I'll smack you both." And he let them go. One of the final sightings came as the boys were nearing the railway line. A woman walking with her young daughter passed by. James was trailing behind the boys, visibly upset and limping. She stopped. But before she could speak, John piped up, "It's all right. We're almost there." She smiled politely and watched them walk away. That was the last moment someone could have stopped what was coming. Each person had doubts, yet each found a way to rationalize it. They looked like brothers. They were just kids. They seemed calm. I wasn't screaming. "It's probably not my business." None of them could have imagined that these boys weren't leading James to safety. They were leading him to his death. The trial, when childhood was put on trial. The confessions were chilling. The evidence was overwhelming. But as the world watched, a difficult question emerged. What do you do when the murderers are children? John Venables and Robert Thompson, both only 10 years old, had confessed to the abduction and murder of James Bulger. Their crime was brutal, deliberate, and undeniable. But they were still children. Just days after their interrogations, both boys were formally charged with abduction and murder. The press was stunned, the public outraged. Could they even be tried like adults? Legally, yes, just barely. Under British law at the time, children under 10 were considered too young to be held criminally responsible, what the law called doli in capax. But John and Robert were 10 years and 8 months old enough to face prosecution, and so, a decision was made. They would be tried as adults. On November 1, 1993, the trial opened at Preston Crown Court. Security was tight. Outside, crowds gathered, some holding signs calling for justice. Others called for revenge. Inside the courtroom, the boys sat in specially raised seats, so they could see over the dock like adults. The symbolism was clear. They may have been children, but they were being held to account. Court-appointed psychiatrists confirmed it. They knew what they did was wrong. They understood it fully. On November 24, 1993, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty. Both John Venables and Robert Thompson were convicted of murder and abduction. The judge, Justice Moreland, addressed them directly. You committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. It was not impulsive, it was premeditated. It was cold, calculated, and systematic. They were sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, a unique British sentence for minors convicted of serious crimes. It meant they would be held indefinitely, until a parole board and the Home Secretary decided they were no longer a threat. But the minimum term? Just 8 years. The country exploded. To many, 8 years wasn't justice. It was an insult. Nearly 280,000 people signed a petition demanding a harsher sentence. Outside the courthouse, crowds screamed at the police vans, carrying the boys away. Monsters. They should hang. They'll be out before they're 20. The press called it a sentence of shame. Some politicians backed the outrage, urging the Home Secretary to increase the minimum term to 15 years. For a time, that request was granted, until the High Court reversed it, declaring it unconstitutional to allow political figures to interfere with sentencing. Fearing mob violence, the court issued a rare ruling. When released, both boys would be granted new identities, relocated, and given lifelong anonymity. This decision sparked even more controversy. To some, it was necessary protection. To others, it was a betrayal of James's memory. The trial had ended, but the public conversation had just begun. What did justice mean when the killers were children? Could children be evil? Or were John and Robert products of a society that had already failed them? For the family of James Bulger, the verdict brought little peace. His mother, Denise Fergus, said, "Justice wasn't served. It was only the beginning of another nightmare." Two Paths After Darkness. In June 2001, after serving 8 years behind bars, John Venables and Robert Thompson were released from secure detention. At just 18 years old, they were handed something their victim never had: a second chance at life. Robert vanished. He changed his name and quietly faded from the public eye. According to reports, he entered into a relationship with another man and has since lived without legal incident or media attention. No arrests. No scandals. Just silence. John Venables, however, never truly left the headlines. In 2008, he was arrested for possessing indecent images of children. In 2010, he was caught again, this time impersonating a woman online, offering up a fictional daughter in child abuse forums. By 2013, he was jailed once more. In 2017, police discovered over 1,000 child pornography files and a handwritten manual detailing how to abuse children and avoid detection. He was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. His parole applications in 2020 and 2023 were both denied. The board stated, "He remains a danger to children." For Denise Fergus, James's mother, the pain has never eased. He was supposed to be rehabilitated. Instead, he's worse. He's more dangerous than ever. She founded the James Bulger Memorial Trust, channeling her grief into advocacy for child protection. Ralph Bulger, James's father, was more outspoken. He criticized the legal system for shielding John and Robert, especially after John's reoffenses. If people had known who he was, maybe a child would have been saved. Maybe someone could have stopped him. To Ralph, John's repeat crimes weren't isolated incidents. They prove what he did to James wasn't a one-off. He's always been dangerous. Now, over 30 years later, Robert remains silent, reportedly with a partner, while John is back in prison. James is gone. And one question remains: did John's darkness start before the murder, or did the murder plant the seed of something far worse? The murder of James Bulger was not just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. It forced an entire nation to confront the uncomfortable truth: children can hurt. And children, when left unguided, can destroy. John Venables and Robert Thompson were not born monsters. They were shaped by broken homes, neglect, violence, and a system that saw the signs but failed to act. There were warnings, there were red flags, but no one connected the dots until it was too late. This case taught us that children don't just need discipline. They need attention. They need structure. They need love that holds them accountable, and guidance that steers them from harm, both to themselves and to others. Because without it, they don't just lose their way. They take others with them. James Bulger was only 2 years old. He never had a chance to grow up. But maybe, if we truly listen, if we watch more closely, act more compassionately, and intervene when it matters, his death won't have been in vain. The lesson isn't that children are dangerous. The lesson is that children are fragile. And what we fail to give them now, the world may one day pay the price for.